lonely lumberjack lived alone for 11 years, until a deaf bride was left tied to his fence post. The townsfolk called him Ghost Timber. Said he once split a pine, so clean it wept sap for 7 straight days. Said he hadn't looked another soul in the eye since the war, or maybe it was since his bride died in the fever of '71. No one could quite remember. All they knew was that Clint Marlowe lived alone at the edge of Elk Hollow, where the trees thickened and the road gave up, 11 years deep into silence. His cabin leaned against the mountain like a man too proud to fall, built by hand from the same trees he cut. The place smelled of cedar and ash, of boiled coffee and winter stiffwool. Inside, time stood still. No clocks, no photographs, just an iron stove, a cot, a battered table, and a leather-bound book where Clint wrote down the names of every tree he felled: Grace, Thorn, Bell, Elijah. He treated them like confessions, as though giving each trunk a name might somehow atone for the taking. He spoke only when he had to. A monthly grunt at the store. A thank you muttered when handed sugar. He hadn't formed a full sentence since the day he buried her. He'd carve her name, Helen, into a white oak stump, and since then, the world had gone quiet. He let it. Silence, he'd found, didn't betray a man. Then came the day of the knocking hooves. It was late October when the frost clung stubborn to the dirt like a drunk to his bottle, and Clint had just returned from the ridge with a half-load of hickory. As he stepped down from his wagon, he heard it, the sharp crack of a whip, a horse's whinny, and wheels tearing off down the slope in cloud of spit and dust. That's when he saw her. A young woman, couldn't be more than 25, was tied to his fence post. Her wrists bound cruel tight, a wool shawl slipping from her shoulders. The sun had already bruised the horizon with streaks of lavender and rust, casting her in a light that made her look more like an omen than a person. She didn't cry, didn't flinch. Her eyes, sharp and ocean gray, fixed on him like she expected nothing and everything all at once. Her dark hair was plaited in a single thick braid, trailing down her back like it belonged to someone who used to believe in order. Her boots were too big, the soles torn. She looked cold, hungry, and worse, she looked resigned. Pinned to her shawl was a folded paper. It read, "Deaf. Useless. Paid for but not wanted. Let the woods take her." Clint stared at it for a long moment, longer than he'd stared at anything in years. Then he stepped forward, slow as thawing ice. The rope was stiff, knotted by someone who wanted it to hurt. He undid it carefully, wordlessly. She didn't thank him. She just rubbed her wrists raw and signed something with her hands, fluid, swift gestures like birds flicking their wings. He didn't understand a lick of it. She waited. He didn't move. Then she pointed at the dirt, sat herself right down next to the fence post, and stared at the woods like she'd decided they were safer than men. Clint didn't ask who she was. Didn't ask where she came from, or who'd left her like a broken tool at his doorstep. He simply walked back into the cabin, lit the stove, and set out a second plate for supper, a gesture he hadn't made in over a decade. By nightfall, she'd swept the porch clean with a branch broom and lined her boots by the shed. She'd chosen not to leave, and he'd chosen not to send her away. Neither of them said a word about it. The next morning, Clint found her stacking his firewood, wrong, but with conviction. She looked up at him for approval, and he just nodded once. She smiled like it meant something, and maybe it did. He gave her the shed, and she swept it spotless, laid a bedroll on the floor, and stitched the holes in its canvas flap. She never asked to be inside the house. She didn't seem to want anything from him, not even safety. The town, though, they noticed. Whispers rippled through the saloon like wind through leaves. That old hermit's got a girl now. One that can't scream. They didn't come up to the cabin, but Clint felt their eyes in the store, saw the preacher's wife pause too long at the sugar shelf, pretending not to stare. The sheriff rode by slow one afternoon, tipping his hat, but not smiling. Said, "Don't let her get hurt out there, Marlowe. Folks remember things." Clint didn't answer, just kept loading nails into his sack. Back home, she was tending the kettle and stitching a patch onto his coat. Her hands never stopped moving, telling stories he didn't know how to read. He found her one dusk kneeling at the little cross by the back hill, Helen's grave. She'd laid a daisy on the soil, not because she knew who it was, but because graves deserve flowers. That night, she signed something again. 3 simple motions. Clint watched her hands, then pointed to himself, confused. She did it again, slower. Then tapped her chest, touched her lips, and opened her palm, like a gift. He didn't understand the signs. But the meaning, somehow, it settled in his chest like an axe in soft bark. And when she looked away, ashamed, he reached for the old leather book, flipped past the trees, and carved something new. Evelyn. She turned when she saw it. Her breath caught. Her eyes did not. Clint didn't speak. But that night, for the first time in 11 years, the silence between two people didn't feel empty. It felt earned. By the time the first snow settled over Elk Hollow like sifted flour from heaven, Evelyn had made herself part of the land. She moved through the cabin and yard like someone who'd always been there, tending the stew pot, folding shirts with quiet precision, leaving bundles of dried herbs on the window ledge. She never tried to claim space, yet every day, Clint found that she had woven herself into it. They spoke in gestures. At first, hers. Fast, graceful motions that reminded Clint of candle flames in a dark room. Then, slowly, he began to mimic. He learned the signs for fire, sleep, water. He fumbled thank you in tree, tapping his chest and pointing skyward. She laughed silently the first time. He signed axe and hit himself in the forehead with his thumb. Sometimes they'd sit on the porch in the pale morning frost, her stitching, him sharpening his blade. She would pause, point to the horizon, and make a swirling motion, her sign for wind. He would nod, draw the same shape in the dirt, then write its name underneath with a stick. Gale. This was how they learned each other. Word by word, shape by shape. No declarations. Just two quiet people carving language from stillness. But the world beyond their clearing had not forgotten either of them. One icy morning, Clint rode into town for winter salt and canvas. The general store fell quiet when he entered. Miss Gracie Pike, the preacher's wife, stood at the counter, her sharp eyes narrowing beneath a velvet bonnet. "Strange," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "How a girl goes missing from Carson Junction and ends up at a hermit's cabin in the woods." Clint didn't answer. He never did. He paid in coin and silence, loaded his mule, and rode out without looking back. But the whispers clung like smoke to his flannel. When he returned home, he found Evelyn barefoot in the snow, her skirts muddy, her breath misting like ghost light. She was planting, kneeling over the thawed patch of soil by the edge of the fence, pushing dry seeds into the cold earth with tender, deliberate care. He didn't understand. Not fully, but he knew this was not madness. This was hope. He crouched beside her, reached out, and gently signed, "Why?" She looked at him, her lips parting slightly. Then she drew a crooked line in the dirt, patted the soil, and signed spring. That night, Clint built her a small wooden bench for the shed. Left it outside her door without a word. In the morning, it was inside, polished with beeswax. But peace, like snowfall, never lasts long in the hollow. A week later, the gambler rode in. Silas Boone. He came with a swagger and a sly smile, leaning on the rail outside the saloon, his boots still dusted from some trail. Folks said he'd sold Evelyn, passed her off to a rancher out in the Badlands for a bottle and a bet. When the rancher found she was deaf, he'd abandoned her like spoiled freight. Now Silas wanted her back. Not because he missed her. Because she was stirring up talk, and talk leads to questions, and questions ruin men like him. He came up the trail late one dusk, reeking of whiskey and smoke, calling Clint's name with the giddy threat of someone who thinks he's never lost a fight. Evelyn heard the hoof beats first. She was hanging laundry, frozen linens snapping in the wind. When she saw him, her face didn't pale. It hardened. She turned and walked back inside. Clint met Silas at the edge of the yard, arms crossed, axe slung low in his palm. "She's mine," Silas spat, his mouth curling. "Paid fair. Got papers in Carson to prove it." Clint said nothing. Silas laughed. "Of course. Still the mute. Tell you what, I'll take her now, and you won't have to bleed." Clint didn't flinch. He stepped forward, slow as winter dusk, and dropped the axe to the snow. "She's not yours," he said, his voice rough and used, like bark peeled from an old tree. "She's free." The silence that followed cracked through the woods like a gunshot. Silas lunged, clumsy with drink and pride. Clint didn't dodge. Let the fist land against his jaw, like a gavel. Then, with a single swing, he drove Silas to the ground, pinning him with a knee to the chest. But it was Evelyn who ended it. She stepped forward, calm as snowfall, and signed 3 sharp movements. Clint didn't recognize the words, but Silas did. His face blanched. He cursed, spat in the snow, and stumbled back to his horse without another word. They watched him disappear through the trees, nothing but hoof prints and humiliation in his wake. Later, Clint stood at the stump behind the house, hands trembling. He opened his book, the one with tree names and losses etched deep into the hide. Evelyn approached slowly. She touched the cover, then took his hand. She signed a name, Clint. Then she took his hand again, placed it flat on her chest, where her heart beat sure and steady beneath wool and bone. She signed, I stay. He didn't answer, just nodded slowly, as if afraid the moment might vanish if he breathed too loud. That night, the wind blew warm for the first time in weeks. And the seed she planted, though buried in frost, remained, waiting for spring.